Committee Room 9.
Order. Good morning, everyone. Would everyone please ensure that all electronic devices are turned off or switched to silent mode? We are here today for further line-by-line consideration of the Finance Bill. The selection list for today's sitting is available in the room on the Parliament and on the Parliamentary website. This shows how the clauses, schedules and selected amendments have been grouped together for debate. If any member wishes to press any other amendment in a group to a vote, and this includes the new clauses that have already been debated, they need to let me know before we reach them on the amendment paper. We return to the debate on clause 57 that was adjourned on Tuesday. The Minister would like to make further a speech. So does anyone else wish to speak on the question before I call the Minister? I call the Minister. James Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve on this committee with you as Chair. Very briefly to say that we debated this clause on Tuesday before coming to the moment of decision, and I think the opposition indicated they would not be opposing it, so I therefore move that this clause stands part of the bill.
Thank you. The question is that clause 57 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. We now come to clause 58, with which it would be convenient to consider clauses 59 and 60. The question is that clause 58 stand part of the bill. Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Clauses 58, 59 and 60 make changes to strengthen the conditions that must be met for transfers of shares into an employee benefit trust to be exempt from inheritance tax. An employee benefit trust is a trust which provides benefits and rewards to employees of a company, often in the form of shares in the company. Under certain conditions, such shares are exempt from inheritance tax. All or most employees need to be capable of benefiting from the trust for the inheritance tax exemption to apply, so it cannot be limited to shareholders of the company or family members, for example. In 2023, the previous government launched a consultation on employee ownership trusts and employee benefit trusts, which set out concerns that such trusts are increasingly being used as a tax planning vehicle for shareholders and their families rather than for a wider group of employees. At autumn budget, the current government responded to that consultation and announced changes to strengthen the conditions which must be met for the transfer of shares into an employee benefit trust to be exempt from inheritance tax. The changes being made, therefore, by clause 58 will mean that restrictions on shareholders and their family members benefiting from an employee benefit trust must apply for the entire lifetime of the trust. This clause will address cases where the trust deed allows individuals closely connected with the shareholder to benefit after the participator's death. Clause 58 ensures that the government's position is explicitly clear in legislation, and the change will come into effect on royal assent. Previously, family members of the shareholder who were excluded from benefiting from the capital of the trust were still able to receive income payments from the trust. The changes made by clause 59 will ensure that no more than 25% of employees who can receive income payments from an employee benefit trust may be family members of the shareholder. This reinforces the original policy intent of the employee benefit trust to reward and motivate a wide group of employees. Previously, an individual was able to set up a company, immediately make a transfer of shares to an employee benefit trust, and obtain an inheritance tax exemption. The changes made by clause 60 will mean that shares must have been held for at least 2 years before being transferred into the employee benefit trust. This provision will take into account shares held prior to any share reorganisation, and this change will strengthen protections against employee benefit trusts being used purely for inheritance tax planning purposes. Clauses 59 and 60 are treated as having effect for transfers of value to new and existing trusts on or after October the 30th, 2024. Madam Chair, these clauses will ensure that the tax treatment of employee benefit trusts is consistent with the original policy intent of rewarding and motivating employees whilst minimising opportunities for abuse, and I therefore move that these clauses stand part of the bill.
Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to see you in the chair, as always. As the Minister set out, clauses 58 to 60 make amendments to requirements for inheritance tax exemptions involving employee benefit trusts. Restrictions on shareholders and connected persons benefiting from employee benefit trust will now apply for the lifetime of the trust, as cited in clause 58. No more than 25% of employees who receive income payments from EBT can be connected to the shareholders in the company, as in clause 59, and shares will now need to have been held for at least 2 years prior to being transferred to the EBT as stated in Clause 60. These measures follow on from the same consultation launched in 2023, as the Minister said, which we referred to when we discussed Clause 31 and employee ownership trusts. Although we will not be opposing these clauses on EBTs, there is one issue specifically which was raised during that consultation in relation to these changes, which I would be very grateful for the Minister just to comment on when he stands up. Now, in response to the measure introduced by Clause 59, concerns were raised at consultation on behalf of smaller companies using EBTs, who may now be forced to exclude certain employees from participating in share scheme arrangements in order to comply with this new requirement. And I just wanted to know what the Minister's assessment of that particular impact was, and if the Minister is content that the benefits of these changes outweigh that particular risk that was cited during the consultation. Thank you.
Lib Dem spokesperson Alex MacDonald.
Clause 63.
Do you wish to speak on this clause?
No, thank you.
No. Minister?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I welcome the support for these clauses from the opposition, building on the consultation that started when they were in office. And I think the honourable gentleman's question related to what the effect that the changes might have, particularly on small businesses in particular. So I'll try and answer that now, but obviously he's free to contact me if he feels I haven't covered his point fully. And I feel that the changes that we're making to employee benefit trusts, they won't have an adverse effect on small businesses, because the original policy intent of exempting transfers of value to employee benefit trusts from inheritance tax is to encourage businesses to reward and motivate a wide range of employees. To qualify for the exemption, there are conditions that need to be met, and these conditions are ensure that employee benefit trusts which benefit only shareholders and their families or other people closely connected to shareholders do not receive preferential inheritance tax treatment. So given that that is the aim and the principles behind these clauses, I'm confident they don't have the adverse effect that the honourable gentleman fairly raised, but I hope that provides him with some reassurance.
Thank you. The question is that Clause 58 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Clauses 59 and 60 have just been debated. Leave it to committee. I will put a single question on those clauses. The question is that clauses 59 and 60 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to clause 61. The question is that clause 61 stand part of the bill. Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Clause 61 extends the scope of agricultural property relief from April the 6th this year to land managed under certain environmental agreements. Now, agricultural property relief is an inheritance tax relief that reduces the amount that farmers and landowners must pay on land and other property that is owned and occupied for the purposes of agriculture. This will usually be land or pasture that is used to grow crops or to rear animals. Now, currently, access to APR, agricultural property relief, may be lost where such land is taken out of agricultural production. Some tax advisors and industry representatives believe this provides a potential barrier for some farmers, particularly tenant farmers, to enter certain environmental land management agreements. Following consultation, the previous government announced that it would extend agricultural property relief to such agreements. Madam Chair, I know this was... Oh, good way.
Thank the Minister for giving way, and of course it's welcome that more land is being brought under the scope of agricultural property relief, but given that the cap has been introduced on the level of agricultural property relief at £1 million, is it not somewhat redundant, because the majority of farms, as we've heard, I know the numbers that the government use are different, but the industry believe the majority of farms are going to be over that threshold anyway, so bringing more land within the scope of APR doesn't actually make much difference to the bill that they're going to have to pay at the end.
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member for her question. Of course, as you know, because we've debated this many times, the data which we published based on HMRC data shows that the large majority of small farms will not be affected. The numbers of 530 farms affected by the changes, by the reforms to APR and BPR in 26-27 will be statistics. I'm sure she's she knows well, because she will have seen them in the Chancellor's letter to the Treasury Select Committee, and indeed we've discussed them many times in this place. The clause that we're debating today, Madam Chair, very specifically relates to land managed under certain environmental agreements, and was indeed something proposed by the last government. So I hope that if she allows me to continue with explaining why this clause is important, she might feel able to support it as well, given the benefits that it will bring. Because, Madam Chair, I know that this clause was welcomed by the sector, in fact, and the government agrees with that approach, and I can therefore confirm that there have been no changes to the design outlined by the previous government in March 2024, again why I would hope to get the opposition support for this clause. As a result of the changes being made by clause 61, from April the 6th, 2025, APR will be available for land managed under an environmental agreement with or on behalf of the UK government, devolved governments, public bodies, local authorities or approved responsible bodies. This includes but is not limited to the environmental land management schemes in England and equivalent schemes elsewhere in the UK, as well as any agreement that was live on or after the 6th of March 2024. Madam Chair, the Government is fully committed to increasing the uptake of environmental land management schemes in England, and we are providing the largest ever budget of £1.8 billion for this in 25-26. The changes made by Clause 61 will ensure that the tax system is not a barrier to uptake, thereby also supporting farmers and land managers to deliver, alongside food production, significant and important outcomes for the climate and the environment. And I therefore move that this clause stands part of the bill.
Minister Gareth Davis.
Well, thank you very much. As the Minister said, Clause 61 brings land management under an environmental agreement, be that with the UK government, devolved governments, public bodies, local authorities or approved responsible bodies within the scope of agricultural property relief. I'm afraid, if I can just make one slight point on this, I'm afraid we do have here Labour taking with one hand and providing with another for the £5 million, which of course we absolutely welcome, that they will be giving back to farmers each year with this measure. They will be taking some £500 million a year away through the family farm tax if the OBR's highly uncertain costings are to be believed, and many farmers and in bodies such as the NFU have raised concerns about this. The Chartered Institute of Taxation have queried why the relief remains limited to schemes entered into with public authorities, though, rather than allowing enterprising landowners to enter into other schemes. And on that second point, I'd be really grateful for the Minister's thoughts, but as he alluded to, we won't be opposing this specific measure. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak? Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his support of this measure, and he made wider points around the reforms to agricultural property relief, which, as he'll know, we've debated in this House several times. But I think that the specific clause that we're debating today focuses in a quite targeted way about environmental land management schemes, and so I welcome his support for that, this clause. Now, of course, he asked a question about whether, in the case where you have private environmental land management, which is outside of agreements, I think that was his question that he was asking, why they aren't included. And I can confirm to him that relief will be available for land managed under an environmental agreement, as I said in my opening remarks, with or on behalf of the UK government, devolved governments, public bodies, local authorities, or approved responsible bodies. And this ensures that the extension of the relief only applies where there are high verifiable environmental standards.
Thank you. The question is that Clause 61 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to Clause 62. The question is that Clause 62 stand part of the bill. Minister James Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Clause 62 makes changes to remove requirements in limited circumstances that the National Savings Bank, more commonly known as NSNI, obtains from HMRC a statement of inheritance tax paid before making a payment out. Now, the regulations concerned are consolidated regulations which confer powers and administrative obligations on NSNI. Before paying out a deceased person's national savings and securities to personal representatives, they make due diligence checks such as whether the payee has a grant of probate. The changes made by Clause 62 remove the requirement to contact HMRC directly to check the inheritance tax paid in limited circumstances, including certain domicile conditions. This is no longer required in line with the modern compliance processes. This is a minor change connected to, but slightly out of scope of, the reforms for non-UK domiciled individuals. This change is a minor issue, consequential to the non-UK domicile reforms, and I therefore move that Clause 62 stands part of the bill.
Shadow Minister.
Madam Chair, well, the Minister may think this is a minor issue, and he'll be pleased to know I agree with him. This is a redundant measure, just to wake everybody up. This is a redundant measure. We will not be opposed.
Simply to applaud the Honourable Gentleman's theatre in delivering that response, but to welcome his support.
The question is that Clause 62 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to Amendment 66, with which it will be convenient to consider Clauses 63 and 64, and new Clause 2 and new Clause 4. I call Mr MacDonald to move Amendment 66.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So Clause 63, page 68, line 10, I seek to leave out 3279 and insert 3164, which is basically unchanged from last year. That's my proposal. Now, as one of the few MPs from Scotland here today, I am sure I'm not alone in understanding the vital importance of the Scottish whisky industry, not just to Scotland, but the UK economies. However, it bears repeating just how significant this industry is. I would like to highlight a few key statistics. Scotland is home to the production of 70% of UK spirits, when whisky, gin and vodka. And in 2023, Scotch whisky accounted for 74% of Scotland's food and drink exports, employed 41,000 people in Scotland, and an additional 25,000 throughout the UK. Now, the Prime Minister himself recognised the importance of this industry, and he went to Inchdarney Distillery in November 23 and tweeted, "Labour will put growth at the heart of our government and back Scotch whisky producers to the hilt." And similarly, the Honourable Member for West Dunbartonshire joined his sentiment when he co-signed a letter to the Chancellor prior to the budget, urging her to back one of the great industries and undo the damage of last year's duty increase and allow Scotch whisky to deliver for the economy. Yet despite these commitments, the 2024 autumn budget fails to deliver the support the Scotch whisky industry so urgently needs. Now, a new survey has come out that revealed that 43% of 18 to 34-year-olds have given up drinking alcohol entirely. 43%. The quoted spirit companies, the biggest two of them, their share price have halved over the last year. And in this bill, it proposes 1p off a pint of beer, which is a bit of a stunt, I think everybody can agree, whilst increasing the cap to spirits by 32p, plus a related VAT increase of 6p. That means that duty is £9.18 on a standard bottle of vodka, gin, or Scotch whisky. Just for information, over the last 16 years, there has been a doubling of duty on spirits. I'm concerned with so many that what we are doing is we're plucking the golden goose, just one time too many. The facts are that alcohol duty in the UK is at the highest in the G7, and a double measure of spirits is taxed 4 times more than the average strength pint of cider in pubs, even when the cider contains more alcohol. So effectively, we're taxing whisky and gin and vodka 4 times as much. What's worse, this punitive duty doesn't even deliver more revenue for the Treasury, and I think this is a really important point. Since the 10.1% increase in spirits implemented by the previous government last year, the revenue from spirits fell by £237 million in the following 17 months, according to the HMRC. This clearly demonstrates that higher taxes on Scotch and spirits don't lead to higher revenue. And this compares with the 800 million, this 237 million, it doesn't directly compare, but pretty similarly compares with 800 million that was forecast to increase. So duty has fallen dramatically. So I understand that in most reasons recent years, alcoholic duty has risen in line with inflation under the new system. However, freezing it in this budget would send a clear message that this government stands behind one of our greatest industries. The troubled hospitality industry and the Scotch whisky industry doesn't need hollow words of support. It needs meaningful action. And I urge the government to freeze alcohol duty on Scotch whisky and other spirits and keep its promise. We need to back Scotch producers to the hilt, said the Prime Minister. Let's give this industry the angel share it deserves. Thank you.
Minister.
Sorry, I apologise. James,
Sorry. James.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Mrs. Vaz, apologies.
Not all about me.
Confusion on our side. The committee will be pleased to know I actually have. The committee will be pleased to know I have lots to say on this section, so we can all settle in for a little while. Clause 63 increases the headline rate of alcohol duty by RPI, providing a reduction to the rates for draft alcoholic products and cuts the rates paid by eligible small producers. And the government has also chosen not to extend the temporary easement of certain wine products. And I say at the outset that His Majesty's opposition is a strong supporter of the broader alcohol sector. We do have some concerns about some of the provisions and the impact they will have on important sectors, and as well as speaking to Clause 63 and 64, I'll speak to new Clause 4, tabled in my name and that of my honourable friend. Under the previous government, a progressive strength-based duty system was introduced in 2023 following the alcohol duty review. This was the biggest review of alcohol duties for more than 140 years, with a new simplified alcohol duty rate system based on the common sense principle of taxing alcohol by strength, to modernise the existing duties to support businesses and to meet our public health objectives. And this was the first time that public health objectives had been inserted into the alcohol duty system. The reforms also introduced two new reliefs: the draft relief to reduce the duty burden on draft products sold on trade venues, and small producer relief. At the autumn statement 2023, the previous government froze alcohol duty rates until August 2024, and that was then extended until February 25 at the following budget. According to the OBR, alcohol duty receipts are expected to raise £12.4 billion this year, falling by 0.6% compared to last year as the rates remain frozen. But receipts are then forecast to increase by 5% a year on average to reach £15.9 billion in the end of the Parliament. And pubs make a huge contribution to our cultural economy and our communities. And when we were in government, we recognised this and introduced a raft of supportive measures, including draft relief and small producer relief and the Brexit pubs guarantee that I'm sure all honourable members will remember and welcome. And I therefore welcome the increased draft relief from February from 9.2% to 13.9% in these clauses, and also that the relative value of small producer relief will be maintained. And while we welcome the inclusion of both reliefs, the increase to draft relief will mean that beer duty on a 5% pint of beer reduces from 54p to 53p, a 1p saving. I fear that drinkers will not be toasting the Exchequer Secretary over that. Turning to whisky, as the Honourable Member has set out, although it is a little bit early in the day, for me, Scotch whisky is one of the most iconic and successful industries. 43 bottles of Scotch whisky exported per second, supporting over 66,000 jobs across the UK, many of which are in rural areas. And the decision to uprate duty rates by RPI has been met with deep concern by the industry. Indeed, the Scotch Whisky Association has said this represents a broken commitment after the Prime Minister claimed last year that his government's trade strategy would back Scotch producers to the hilt. That sounds rather like the promise that was given to farmers by the Prime Minister and also broken with Labour's family farm tax. Indeed, the Managing Director of Diageo has said this betrayal will leave a bitter taste for drinkers and pubs whilst jeopardising jobs and investment across Scotland. I'd be interested to hear the Minister's response to those comments, and has the government calculated the risk to jobs in the sector more widely? A similar picture is painted by the cider industry, which supports more than 11,500 jobs and attracts more than 1 million tourists each year. The National Association of Cider Makers have raised fears that increasing the headline rate alongside the national insurance increases and the family farm tax could put elements of the UK cider industry at risk. Has the Minister calculated the cumulative impact that these tax rises will have on this sector? And it's at this point we should really consider the wider context in which we are discussing these increases. Time and again we hear about a budget placing a range of cost pressures on the hospitality industry, a key contributor to the UK economy. According to UK Hospitality, in the last 6 years, hospitality has increased its annual economic contribution by 20 billion to 93 billion. These tax rises in the budget, including the £25 billion a year jobs tax, will make it much harder for them to succeed. And just look at the impact. Colliers, a professional property services company, reported that cutting the hospitality business rate relief from 75% to 40% will mean restaurants will face a bill on average of over £13,000 a year, up from £5,500.
May I intervene, please?
Of course.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if the Minister would like to comment. When they fix this, all these additional taxes, do they take into account what happens in Scotland, where many hospitalities do not get this business rates relief? So we're getting hit twice on exactly the same issue. Thank you.
Honourable Member makes an important point, which I'm sure the Minister will want to cover when he responds. The average bill for pubs will go from £4,000 a year to £9,642,000 a year. Any member who talks to any hospitality businesses in their constituency will know the real world challenges that they're facing. As it happens, my favourite pub in my constituency closed its doors on Sunday, in part due to the increased costs and taxes that they are facing in the sector. And has the government considered the impact of the combination of these tax rises on pubs and the wider sector? Turning to wine, as part of our reforms, we introduced a wine easement for 18 months until February 2025, and the Minister will be aware of concerns from some in the sector that this coming to an end will now see duty increasing by 98p in just over 18 months. And whilst we support the transition to the new regime and the end of the easement, I'd be grateful if the Minister can clarify what engagement he's had to understand how prepared the industry is for the new system. And we have many incredible wineries here in the UK, and in 2023 sales rose 10% to reach nearly 9 million bottles, so supporting domestic wine producers should be a priority. In my constituency, I'm fortunate to have Burn Valley Winery, Cobble Hill and others who are producing great products, and they are proving very popular and helping to improve the rural economy and employment. However, growers have higher production and establishment costs, which will be made more challenging by the tax rises in these clauses and in the wider budget. And to support the industry, GB Wine have proposed the introduction of a cellar door duty relief scheme modelled on the Australian scheme. This is part of wine tourism, which a survey by Visit England demonstrated could potentially increase visits by 16 million visitors. And the government has an ambitious target to increase annual visits to the UK by 50 million by 2030, up by 38 million from last year. And in the spirit of trying to help the government lift their foot off the growth lever, this is perhaps an idea that the Minister will have a look at and see if he considers whether it has any merit to be introducing. And it's because of the challenges facing producers, facing the hospitality sector, that we've tabled new clause 4. This would require the Chancellor, within 6 months of the Act being passed, to make a statement to Parliament about the impact that the increase of alcohol duties are having, including on various impacted sectors. As we've heard, increases to duty rates place significant additional costs on hospitality, pubs, whisky, spirits, wine, cider and other sectors, and we're concerned this could inhibit growth and business investment. The previous government recognised their significant contribution, saw an increase in business investment by the hospitality sector. But given the headwinds facing alcohol producers and hospitality businesses that support so many jobs, it's only right the government report back to Parliament on the impact of the choices it's made. Finally, Ms Vaz, turning to clause 64, this abolishes the duty stamps scheme for spirit drinks from the 1st of May 2025. This was a commitment made by the last Conservative government in the spring budget, and of course we welcome this provision. It was important when it was introduced, but then it became an increasingly diminishing part of HMRC's compliance response. So of course unnecessary regulation should be removed where possible, and I welcome the government's apparent commitment now to deregulation as set out in the Chancellor's speech but it would have more credibility if it wasn't also bringing forward the unemployment bill that will add £4.5 billion a year to business costs. So as I've set out, Ms. Vaz, we support the changes, this change that will reduce administrative burden, and I look forward to the Minister's response on behalf of the sector, on behalf of producers that I've raised in terms of the other clauses and the uprating.
Paul Kohler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. May I draw members' attention to my entry in the Register of Interests. Particularly, I own a bar called Celador, not the same Celador as the one to which the gentleman was just referring. I want to speak about wine in particular and the hospitality and nighttime economy in general. Currently, under the current regime, under the wine easement, 85% of all wine is sold in the UK pays the same rate of duty. It's now to be replaced by 30 different rates. That fails to take account of fundamental differences between wine and other more manufactured alcoholic drinks. You cannot predict the ABV of wine with precision before or during the winemaking process. The alcohol content is only stable at the point where the wine goes into the bottle. The ABV will vary between different years, from different vats. Until bottling, we don't know the ABV of a particular bottle of wine. That creates huge uncertainty over price and profit margins for the industry if there are different rates of interest depending on the particular ABV, down to gradation of 0.1% of ABV. And that's particularly important with low-cost wines. The point is, this regime is utterly impractical for wine producers and wine merchants. As Hal Wilson, the co-founder of Cambridge Wine Merchants, told me, in my business this feels like death by 1,000 cuts, or even 2,000 cuts. We sell over 2,000 different wines each year, and from February we'll need to know the precise ABV of each and every one before being able to calculate their full cost. For each 0.1% ABV difference, there's a different amount of tax to be paid. Now, I have written to the Minister about this, and I had a long and detailed response from him, for which I'm grateful. And he does make the point that HMRC will change its practices will accept the ABV on the label of the bottle, and the label on the bottle can be at 0.5%, the nearest 0.5%. But that's current practice. That's not in the legislation as I understand it, and it's still far too complex, and much of my criticism still holds. Secondly, the letter fundamentally misunderstands why people drink wine. Wine is consumed for the taste, not the strength. Compare an ABV goes to the taste profile. Compare a light Beaujolais with a robust Rioja. It's all about taste, not about buying it because it's stronger to get more drunk. That's not how wine consumers consume wine. Turning to hospitality and nighttime economy, this industry is facing an existential crisis. Rising energy prices, recent inflation, labour shortages following Brexit, changes to commuting patterns, the more than doubling of business rates. Now alcohol duties is another burden. It's death by 1,000 cuts. Every incremental cost makes survival more difficult. So that's why we're asking for a review after 6 months to see the effect on the wine industry, on the hospitality industry, the nighttime economy, and other industries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'll attempt to address the points raised by various opposition members in their contributions as I go through my remarks. To begin with, Madam Chair, let me make clear that Clause 63 makes changes to the alcohol duty rates from February the 1st, 2025. Alcohol duty rates for products qualifying for draft relief will be cut by 1.7% to take a penny off duty on the average strength pint. Whilst rates on all other products, thank you, whilst rates on all other products will increase by the retail price index. This clause also increases the relative value.
Angus MacDonald.
Okay.
Thank you, Minister.
Member aware you can respond at the end.
Say again.
You can respond at the end.
Right. In that
Still want to
case,
make
I
an
shall.
intervention.
Sorry. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for your guidance. As I was saying, Madam Chair, the clause also increases the relative value of small producer relief for both draft and non-draft products, and Clause 64 ends the alcohol duty stamps scheme. To reassure members that in the consideration of what position to take at the autumn budget, I had meetings myself, and officials had further meetings with representatives from the wine industry, beer industry, spirits, cider, as well as public health people to understand the full range of opinions on this matter and how we could carefully calibrate our policy response. But, okay.
Harriet Cross.
On that list of people you met with, Scotch Whisky Association wasn't one of them. Can the Minister confirm if he did meet with the Scotch Whisky Association?
Minister.
They were included in spirits. Lovely. Madam Chair, alcohol duty is currently frozen, as we know, until February the 1st, 2025. The Office of Budget Responsibility's baseline assumption, reflected in its forecast, is that alcohol duty will be uprated by RPI inflation each year. The Government has decided to help maintain the value of alcohol duty for non-draft products by uprating it from the 1st of February. At the same time, we are recognising the social and economic importance of pubs, as well as the fact that they promote more responsible drinking by cutting duty for draft products, the majority of alcohol which is sold in pubs. A progressive, strength-based duty system was introduced on August 1st, 2023 by the previous government following the alcohol duty review. The reforms introduced two new reliefs: a draft relief to reduce the duty burden on draft products sold in on-trade venues, and small producer relief that replaced the previous small brewers relief. This clause increases the generosity of both of those reliefs. Turning now to the alcohol duty stamp scheme, which is an anti-fraud measure applied to larger containers of high-strength alcoholic products, typically spirits. It requires the mandatory stamping of certain retail containers with a duty stamp. Now, in 2022, HMRC was commissioned to review the effectiveness of that scheme, and that review found that it is outdated, susceptible to being undermined, and now plays a diminished compliance role, concluding that the cost and administrative burdens imposed on the spirits industry could no longer be justified. The previous government announced at the end of the scheme at Spring Budget 2024, and that is a decision which this government will implement from May the 1st, 2025. This date was chosen after consultation with businesses who requested sufficient time to prepare. Now, Madam Chair, to go through the clauses in a little more detail. Firstly, Clause 63 makes 4 changes. First, it increases the rates of alcohol duty for non-draft products to reflect RPI inflation. Second, it reduces the rates of alcohol duty on draft products by 1.7%. Third, it amends the tables in Schedule 9 of the Finance No. 2 Act 2023 that are used by small producers to calculate their duty discount under small producer relief. This increases the value of small producer relief for both draft and non-draft products in relation to the main rates for these products. In cash terms, the current cash discount provided to small producers for draft products is maintained, whilst the discount provided to small producers for non-draft products is increased. Small producer relief provides that the same relative discount irrespective of whether a product also qualifies for draft relief. And finally, as a consequence of the RPI increase in non-draft rates, it increases the simplified rates in Schedule 2 of the Travellers Allowances Order 1994, which is used for calculating duty on alcoholic products brought into Great Britain. Now, some honourable members raised questions about the impact of these measures on pubs and the hospitality industry. To support the hospitality industry, particularly recognising the role that pubs play in local communities, the Government has announced, as I've set out, a reduction to the alcohol duty rates paid on draft products. This reduces businesses' total duty bill by up to £100 million a year and increases the duty differential between draft and non-draft products from 9.2% to 13.9% for qualifying beer and cider. As we've mentioned a couple of times in this debate, the reduction to draft relief rates will also result in the average alcoholic strength pint at 4.58% ABV, paying 1% less in duty. Draft relief provides a reduced rate of duty on draft products below 8.5% ABV packaged in containers of at least 20 litres, designed to connect to a qualifying system for dispensing drinks. Turning to Clause 64, Madam Chair. This clause ends the alcohol duty stamp scheme from May the 1st this year, removing the provisions in the Finance No. 2 Act 2023 and secondary legislation of the Duty Stamps Regulations 2006. It also makes consequential changes and removes references to the scheme where they appear elsewhere in legislation. I will now turn to some of the proposed amendments proposed by members of the opposition. And firstly, Amendment 66, which would freeze alcohol duty for alcoholic products above 22% alcohol by volume or ABV. This is contrary to the Chancellor's decision at autumn budget to increase these duty rates to reflect inflation and would cost the Exchequer £150 million per year. Specifically, Madam Chair, in relation to the Scotch whisky industry, I would like to set out that the overall alcohol package balances commercial pressures on the alcohol industry with the need to raise revenue for our vital public services and reduce alcohol-related harms. Consumers and brewers in Scotland will benefit in line with the rest of the UK, with consumption and production patterns roughly equal nationwide. Of course, 90% of Scotch whisky is exported, which means it pays no duty. Now, the Scotch Whisky Association's own figures show the health of the industry. The budget offers support to the Scotch whisky industry by removing the alcohol duty stamp scheme, which we've just considered, and through investment in the spirits drink verification scheme by reducing fees for geographical verification. Madam Chair, new clauses 2 and 4, also tabled by opposition members, would require the Chancellor to make additional statements about the impact of the alcohol duty measures. The Government does not believe further statements to be necessary. As usual, a tax information and impact note was published at autumn budget outlining the anticipated impacts of this measure to alcohol producers and the hospitality sector. Alcohol duty, like other taxes, will be reviewed at future budgets. New Clause 2 also requires a review of the impact on trade, but of course UK alcohol duty is not charged on exports. Honourable members raised in some of their contributions the impact on the hospitality sector in Scotland given changes to business rates, but of course business rates are devolved and the Scottish Government is accountable to the Scottish Parliament on devolved areas. Honourable members also raised questions around the wine easement and why it had not been extended or made permanent. I would remind honourable members that the wine easement was intended as a transitional arrangement given to the wine industry to give them time to adapt to the new strength-based duty calculation for wine. The revised alcohol duty system simplified and reduced differences between categories of alcohol. Making the wine easement permanent would introduce a new differential into the system as well as add to the complexity of that system. It would further lead to a duty regime whereby stronger ABV wines pay less in proportion to their alcohol content than lower ABV wines. Making the wine easement permanent would therefore undermine the simplification and public health objectives for the revised alcohol duty system. In conclusion, Madam Chair, the changes to the alcohol duty balance public health objectives, fiscal pressures, cost of living pressures, and the economic and social importance of pubs, whilst also supporting small producers by increasing the generosity of small producer relief. Furthermore, the end of the alcohol duty stamp scheme will simplify procedures for approximately 3,500 registered alcohol importers and producers, reducing overall costs on the spirits industry by an estimated £7 million a year. I therefore move that Clause 63 stands part of the bill, and I urge the Committee to reject Amendment 66, New Clause 2 and New Clause 4.
Mr MacDonald, respond?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I don't have a great deal to add to this. I did miss out on the disclosure. I own a pub as well, which you're all very welcome to visit when you're in Fort William. Don't all rush. Never rains there. Can I just come back very briefly on this 1p a pint, which we were promised? The whole industry, hospitality and beer industry, have come together to agree that that is a stunt and that 1 penny will not get passed on to the customer. It's just not relative at all because the rate of increase or reduction in BPR and the national insurance increase and minimum wage increase effectively means that the cost to the hospitality industry is going through the roof. And you know that perfectly well, but you still continue to trot out your line. Secondly, on the whisky industry, I'm not sure in the whisky industry the account for taking of potential tariffs. We talk about exports being very strong, but actually they're not very strong at the moment. And lastly, on tax overall, when I make a submission to the Scottish Government about tax for hospitality, whisky industry, etc., they all blame Westminster, and when I speak to Westminster ministers about it, they all blame Scotland. So the net result is a hospitality industry, etc., in Scotland is suffering from both sides, and it is just simply not fair on that industry. Thank you.
On that point.
Yeah.
On the business rates, but clearly they are devolved to the Scottish Government, and they are fully set within their remit to help the hospitality industry. And we talked about standing behind the whisky industry. One of the very first things the Business Secretary, my honourable friend, the Business Secretary did was go to work out with Brazil to put a protected status for the Scottish whisky industry, which will mean millions of pounds extra in exports to Brazil. And also we're talking about Clause 64, the abolition of duty stamps for alcoholic products, that will also help the whisky industry. So there is a number of things that this government is doing, both in terms of from the tax status of whisky, but also in terms of from the business sector as well, to increase exports for the industry, to stand behind this industry. So I think the honourable member should perhaps reflect that in his comments too.
I'm finished, thank you. Yes, so I'd like to propose the amendment that I started off with.
Amendment 66 proposed to clause 63. As on the amendment page, the question is that the amendment be made. As members are of that opinion, say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Division is right.
This is kind of good. Harriet Cross.
No votes.
Gareth Davis. No votes. Paul Collar.
Aye.
Angus MacDonald.
I'm 75% deaf, so I'll just stand up and miss what people say, so sorry. Aye. Thank you.
David Murray. No. Tristan Osborne. No. Greg Boynton.
No.
Emma Reynolds.
No.
Ryan.
No.
Blake Stevenson.
No vote.
Alistair Strathern.
No.
Christian Wakeford.
No.
James Wilde.
No vote.
Yuan Yang.
No.
So ayes for 2 and noes 10. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Clause 63 has just been debated, so we proceed straight to the question that clause 63 stand on of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Clause 64 has just been debated, so we will proceed straight to the question about clause 64 stand on the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to clause 65, with which it will be convenient to consider new clause 5. The question is that clause 65 stand part of the bill. Minister James Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Clause 65 implements changes announced at Autumn Budget 2024 concerning tobacco duty rates. Duty charge on all tobacco products will rise in line with the tobacco duty escalator, with an additional increase being made for hand-rolling tobacco to reduce the gap with cigarettes. Smoking rates in the UK are falling, but they are still too high. Around 12% of adults are now smokers. Smoking remains the biggest cause of preventable illness and premature deaths in the UK, killing around 80,000 people a year and up to 2/3 of all long-term users. We have plans to reduce smoking rates further to achieve our smoke-free UK ambition. To realise this ambition, we announced our intention to phase out the sale of tobacco products for future generations as part of the Tobacco and Vapes Bill, along with powers to extend smoke-free legislation to some outdoor areas. At Autumn Budget, my right honourable friend the Chancellor announced that the government will increase tobacco duty in line with the escalator. This clause therefore specifies that the duty charge on all tobacco products will rise by 2% above RPI inflation. In addition, duty on hand-rolling tobacco increases by 12% above RPI inflation. These new tobacco duty rates will be treated as taking effect from 6 p.m. on the day they were announced, October the 30th last year. Now, recognising the potential interactions between tobacco duty rates and the illicit market, HMRC and Border Force launched their refreshed illicit tobacco strategy in January 2024. The strategy is supported by £100 million of new funding, which will be used to scale up ongoing work, as well as support new activities set out in the strategy, including enhanced detection and intelligence capabilities. Madam Chair, suggested new Clause 5 would require the Chancellor to review the impact of increased tobacco rates on the illicit tobacco market within 6 months of the Act being passed. The Government respectfully will not accept this amendment, as the potential impact of illicit markets is already one of several factors the Government takes account of when a decision on tobacco rates is made. I would also note that the approach used in the costings, certified by the Office of Budget Responsibility at Budget, accounts for behavioural responses to changing excise rates, including the impact of illicit markets. HMRC also publishes tobacco tax cuts annually, which allow for an analysis of the long-term trends in illicit trade. Whilst rejecting this amendment, I can assure members of the committee that the government will continue to monitor illicit trade and support the efforts of our enforcement agencies to counter it. HMRC and Border Force have had strategies in place to reduce the illicit trade in tobacco for over 20 years, and this has helped to reduce the tobacco tax gap from 21.7% in 2005-06 to 14.5% in 22-23. This happened during a prolonged period in which tobacco duties were consistently increased, as the attitude of all administrations, including I believe the last one, has been that the threat of illicit tobacco needs to be addressed by reducing its availability, rather than allowing it to dictate our public health and tax policies. On this matter, I would hope that all members of the committee would agree, and I can assure members this will continue to be this government's approach. Madam Chair, this clause will continue the tried and tested policy of using high duty rates on tobacco products to make tobacco less affordable. It will help continue the reduction in smoking prevalence, supporting our ambition for a smoke-free UK, and reduce the burden placed on smoking by smoking on our public services. I therefore move that this clause stand part of the bill, and I urge the committee to reject new clause 5.
Shadow Minister James Wild.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Baz. As we've heard from the Minister, Clause 65 increases excise duty on all tobacco products and the minimum excise tax on cigarettes by the GT escalator RPI plus 2%. In addition, the duty rate for hand-rolling tobacco increases by an additional 10%. This is a one-off increase that is in addition to the restated policy of increasing rates in line with RPA plus 2%. And we are broadly supportive of these measures, but I do have some questions around purchaser behaviour and its impact on the illicit market and enforcement. In addition to speaking to Clause 65, I will also be speaking to new Clause 5, tabled in my name, which the Minister referred to. Tobacco receipts are expected to raise £8.7 billion this year, down by 2.7% from last year, and they're forecast to decline by 0.5% a year on average over the rest of the forecast period to £8.5 billion, as declining tobacco consumption offsets increasing GT rates. And the tax impact and information note explains that over the 4 years from 2019, the tobacco escalator coincided with a reduction in smoking prevalence from 14.1% to 11.9% of people aged over 18, and that is clearly welcome. And the government is bringing forward, as the Minister referred to, the Tobacco and Vapes Bill, which has lots of measures to make vapes less attractive to children and harder to get hold of. And there's a lot to be said about that bill, but fortunately that is the job of another committee and not for us. Increasing the price of tobacco clearly comes with the risk of boosting the illicit market. The tax information note suggests that some consumers might engage in cross-border shopping and purchase from the illicit tobacco market, and HMRC will monitor and respond to any potential shift. Indeed, the OBR has suggested that the GT rate is beyond the peak of the Laffer curve, the revenue maximising rate of tax. Can the Minister confirm what measures will form HMR's response to any shift in illegal consumption? And there's also some questions around the figures, because whilst HMRC estimates that 10% of cigarettes and 35% of hand-rolling tobacco consumption is from illegal and non-UK GT-paid sources, evidence submitted by industry believes this is a significant understatement. Their data shows consumption of tobacco from non-duty UK-paid sources currently accounts for 30% of cigarettes and 54% of the hand-rolling tobacco consumption. Has the Minister discussed with HMRC the difference between those figures and the basis on which they have been put together? The Tobacco Manufacturers Association has said that the illegal market is not in decline, contrary to HMRC's claims, it is expanding. And as well as providing more accurate figures on the scale of the illegal market, it would be useful to know whether the government have calculated the potential consequence for retailers and law enforcement of an expanding legal market. Happily.
Will the honourable member agree with me that the tobacco market's estimates are not an unbiased estimate of the illicit market, and they have a lot of form about exaggerating the scale of the illicit tobacco market in the UK?
Grateful to the honourable member. He's probably seen the same paperwork and evidence that the industry has produced. I don't think we should dismiss it out of hand. I think they do go around, for example, on football terraces and pick up the empty packets and see where they came from and then do sampling and the other measures. So, of course, their evidence should be challenged and tested. My point is, has the HMRC done that work with the sector to see if their figures are wrong and HMRC is all perfectly right, then we can follow the HMRC ones. I'm raising a legitimate concern, I think, about the accuracy of the data and making sure we're all operating from the same page, because as the OBR has already pointed out, we may have already reached the peak point where the tax is going to be doing harm. The Minister referred in terms of enforcement about the success over the last couple of decades, and in March last year the previous government set out a new strategy to tackle illicit tobacco, and with evidence of a substantial legal market, with whichever set of figures you take, it's still substantial. Be useful to know what steps the government are taking. Are they taking that strategy forward? Are they going to bring forward their own strategy? And a specific proposal that the industry has put forward is calling on the government to provide trading standards with full access to the powers granted to HMRC under the Tobacco Products Traceability and Security Features Amendments Regulations 2023. At present, the legislation allows for trading standards to refer cases to HMRC, who will then consider imposing on-the-spot penalties of up to £10,000 on those selling tobacco. The industry put forward a view it would be far more effective for trading standards to apply the penalty at the point of enforcement rather than having to refer the case to HMRC. They've also suggested allowing trading standards to keep the receipts from any such penalties to reinvest in their enforcement action, and we'll all be familiar with the pressures that trading standards are facing. So, again, I'd be grateful if the Minister could say whether the government's considered those proposals, and if they haven't, whether he will take them away and have a look at them. And it's to ensure there's better understanding of the risk around the illicit market that I have tabled Newport's 5. The Minister respectively dismissed the need for it, but it would require the Chancellor, within 6 months of the Act being passed, to publish an assessment of the impact of the changes of this section of the Act on the illicit tobacco market. As we've heard, increases tobacco duty could alter the behaviour of consumers, could see greater illicit market share. Evidence from the industry, which may be contested, shows that the non-duty UK paid sources is significant, and there's clearly a risk that a further increase to tobacco could boost the market, and HMRC needs to be acting to protect the lawful revenues for the taxpayer. So we'd welcome the Chancellor publishing an assessment of the impact of the changes. As I set out, we'll not be opposing this measure, but I do look forward to the Minister's response to the points that I've made, particularly in regards to the illicit market.
Mr. James Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I welcome the Opposition's support for these measures. I will write to the Honourable Gentleman in relation to some of the queries he raised about specific figures, but to address the points he made around the illicit tobacco market, which is obviously something we all want to consider in some depth in connection with anything we're doing around the tobacco duty rates. As I mentioned during my earlier remarks, the HMRC and Border Force have launched their refreshed illicit tobacco strategy in January 2024, and that's being implemented under this government. It's supported by £100 million of new funding, which we scaled up, which we used to scale up the ongoing work, as well as support new activities which are outlined in the strategy, including enhanced detection and intelligence capabilities. He raised a question as well, Madam Chair, about the impact of increasing tobacco duties on the demand for illicit products, and whether increasing duty rates might push some smokers towards illicit products. I suppose it helps if I set up the context for this discussion, because under the assumptions that we used in the tobacco costings for the autumn budget, which are of course certified by the OBR, the overall level of increases decided upon by the government raises revenue whilst continuing to reduce tobacco consumption. The approach used in costing certified by the OBR takes into account a number of potential behavioural responses to changing excise duty rates, such as quitting or reducing smoking, substituting to vapes, or moving from UK duty-paid consumption to the non-duty paid market, including, of course, the impact on illicit products. I think it should also be said, though, Madam Chair, that the threat from illicit tobacco needs to be addressed by reducing its availability rather than allowing it to dictate our public health and tax policies. Finally, Madam Chair, in terms of the illicit market, the Honourable Gentleman asked whether HMRC had worked with the sector to authenticate their figures. HMRC have done analysis on how external figures are calculated. However, WHO rules prohibit extensive engagement with the industry on issues such as this.
Thank you. The question is that Clause 65 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. We now come to Clause 66, with which it will be convenient to consider new Clause 6. The question is that Clause 66 stand part of the bill. Minister James Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Clause 66 makes changes to the uprating of standard vehicle excise duty rates for cars, vans and motorcycles, excluding first-year rates for cars, in line with RPI from April the 1st this year. Clause 66 would also change the VED first-year rates for new cars registered on or after April the 1st this year to strengthen incentives to purchase zero-emission and electric cars. As announced at the autumn budget, this clause will freeze the zero-emission rate at £10 until 29/30, whilst increasing the rate for higher-emitting hybrid and petrol and diesel cars from 25/26. Now, Madam Chair, vehicle excise duty, or VED, is a tax on vehicle ownership, with rates depending on the vehicle type and the date of first registration. VED first-year rates were introduced as part of the wider changes to the VED system implemented in 2017, and they vary according to emissions. VED first-year rates are paid in the first year of a car's life cycle at the point of registration. From the second year, cars move to the standard rate of VED. From April the 1st, new zero-emissions vehicles registered on or after the said date will also be liable for the VED first-year rates. VED first-year rates have been routinely uprated by Retail Prices Index since introduction in 2017, and as announced by the previous government at the Autumn Statement 2022, from April 2025, electric cars, vans and motorcycles will begin to pay a VED in a similar way to petrol and diesel vehicles. Now, Clause 66 will set the VED rates for 25/26, increasing the standard rates for cars, vans and motorcycles in line with RPI. As part of this uprating, the standard rate of VED for cars registered since April the 1st, 2017 will increase by only £5. The expensive car supplement will also be increased by £15 from £410 to £425. The rates for vans will increase by no more than £15, and motorcyclists will see an increase in rates of no more than £4. From the 1st of April 2025, the VED first-year rate for zero-emission cars will be frozen at £10 until 29/30. For 25/26, first-year rates for cars emitting 1 to 50 grams per kilometre of CO2 will go from £10 to £110, and cars emitting 51 to 75 grams per kilometre of CO2 will go from £30 to £130. Rates for cars emitting 76 grams per kilometre of CO2 or more will double. Now, Madam Chair, new Clause 6 would require the Chancellor to review the impact of the £40,000 expensive car supplement threshold, including consideration of its effects on the proportion of new cars sold which are electric vehicles. As set out in autumn budget, the Government has already committed to consider increasing the £40,000 threshold for EVs at a future fiscal event. The Government recognises that new electric vehicles can still often be more expensive to purchase than their petrol or diesel counterparts, and the need to ensure that EVs are affordable as part of our transition to net zero. In light of this existing commitment, a separate review is unnecessary, so I would urge the committee to reject new Clause 6. The changes to the VED first-year rate outlined in this clause will increase the incentives towards new zero-emission cars at the point of purchase and support the uptake of new electric vehicles. Revenue from this change will also help support public services and infrastructure in the UK, and increasing VED standard rates for cars, vans and motorcycles by RPI in 25/26 will ensure that VED receipts are maintained in real terms. I therefore move that Clause 66 stand part of this bill and that new Clause 6 is rejected.
Shadow Minister James Watt.
Yes, me again, Mr. First. Thank you very much. As we heard from the Minister, Clause 66 provides for changes of certain rates of VED for light passenger and light goods vehicles, increasing in line with RPI. There'll also be changes to the first-year rates for zero emissions, EVs and low-emission vehicles. We're broadly supportive of the measures, but as well as speaking to new Clause 66, I will move and speak to new Clause 6 in my name, and that's my name, my honourable friend for Grantham and Stanford. According to the OBR, VED receipts are expected to raise £8.2 billion in 2024-25, up by £500 million compared to 23-24. and they expect an increase through the forecast period to 11.2 billion, driven by an increasing number of cars, more cars paying the expensive car supplement, and the extension of them to electric vehicles from 2025, which the Minister referred to. And it was the last government who decided that EVs would no longer be exempted from VED and moved to make the system fairer. There are, however, some points I want to raise about the implications, and particularly the expensive car supplement for electric vehicles. New zero-emission cars registered after the 1st of April will be liable for this charge, which currently applies to cars with a list price exceeding £40,000. And that threshold of £40,000 has not changed since 2017, despite obviously inflation and changing technologies. And the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders have called on the government to look at this. The current ECS threshold will add over £2,000 to the cost of a zero-emission vehicle in the first 6 years of ownership, over £3,000 including the standard rate VED that must be paid too, deterring potential buyers from purchasing zero-emissions vehicles and impacting on residual values. In figures quoted by the SMMT, the ECS is likely to capture more than half of the zero-emissions vehicle market from 2025. The Minister referred to the government has said that they may look at this in the future, but we'll come to that in my amendment. And can the Minister confirm how much ECS currently raises and how much it's forecast to raise as a result of these changes? And with the government committed to a 2030 ban on new petrol and diesel vehicle sales, what impact will this ECS have on the government's progress towards its own goal? It's because of those reasons that we've tabled new clause 6, which would require the Chancellor within 6 months of the Act being passed to publish an assessment of the impact of the £40,000 expensive car supplement threshold in section 66. The assessment must consider the effects of the threshold on the proportion of new car sales which are electric vehicles. As we've heard, that threshold has remained unchanged since 2017, and the government is pushing ahead with this 2030 date. My right honourable friend for Richmond and Northallerton introduced some welcome common sense into this debate and moved the date for the sale of new petrol and diesel cars back to 2035. That's the date that the major car manufacturing countries around Europe and the rest of the world have adopted, and it's one that we should have stuck to. So what is here that makes their policy odd is it makes it less likely that people will move to EVs. It makes it more expensive to do so. Perhaps the Treasury is not quite as signed up to the Energy Secretary's dogmatic approach as he is. And on this side of the House, we certainly think that the Energy Secretary is probably the most expensive member of the Cabinet in many ways, and perhaps the Treasury secretly agrees. And whilst I recognise the Minister said that the Government has given a commitment to look at this threshold, what the amendment will do will make that binding, make sure that it happens within a specific time frame, and therefore we do want to see this amendment taken forward. As I've set out, we will be not opposing the clause, but I will be seeking to push the new clause to a division. I also want to say a bit about hybrid vehicles, because they'll start paying road tax at the standard rate as well as paying the ECS where applicable. And these changes will hasten the departure from hybrids, and my honourable friend spoke about this in an earlier part of the debate as well. So I'd be grateful if the Minister could provide an assessment on the decision to disincentivise hybrids was made, and also how many jobs in the UK are based on producing hybrid vehicles at the moment. So with that, Mrs Vaz, I will take my seat.
Minister.
Well, I thank the Shadow Minister for indicating the opposition's support for these clauses, I understand what the opposition are doing by proposing their clause in terms of the points they want to raise, but the government has considered the amendment that they've tabled, and we consider that our commitment made at autumn budget in the public domain to be a strong commitment from the government that we will consider increasing the £40,000 threshold for EVs only at a future fiscal event, because we recognise that electric vehicles, when they're new, can still often be more expensive to purchase than their petrol or diesel counterparts, and there is a need to ensure that EVs are affordable as part of the transition. We also recognise that as the currently largest emitting sector, decarbonising transport is central more widely to the delivery of the UK's cross-economy climate targets. As announced, as I said, at Budget 24, the government will consider raising the threshold for zero-emission cars only at a future fiscal event. The government has no current plans to review the threshold for petrol, diesel and hybrid vehicles, but keeps all taxes under review as part of the budget process.
The question is that Clause 66 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. We now come to Clause 67, with which it would be convenient to consider Clause 68, Clause 69, Clause 71, Government New Clause 1 and New Clause 7. The question is that Clause 67 stand part of the bill. Minister?
I'm sorry. Oh, right, sorry. Sorry, I thought we were going to do a vote on that one.
Yes, vote's coming at the end.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I was awaiting the vote on the amendment.
Now
I understand what's going on. Sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Chair. Clauses 67, 68 and 69 make changes to uprate vehicle excise duty rates for heavy good vehicles in line with the retail price index from April the 1st this year. These clauses also make changes to the VED or VED rates for rigid goods vehicles without trailers, rigid goods vehicles with trailers and vehicles with exceptional loads. Clause 71 uprates the heavy goods vehicle levy in line with RPI from April the 1st this year. Now, the registered keeper of a vehicle is responsible for paying VED. The rates depend on the vehicle's revenue weight, axle configuration and Euro emission status. Furthermore, the HGV levy, introduced in August 2023 and frozen at Autumn Statement 2023, is also payable for both UK and foreign HGVs using UK roads. Similarly to VED, the levy rates depend on the vehicle's weight and Euro emission status. Now, clauses 67, 68 and 69 will set the VED rates for heavy goods vehicles for 25-26, increasing them in line with the RPI. For example, the annual VED liability of the most popular HGV, tax class TC01 VED band E1, will increase by £18 from £560 to £578. Hauliers will not see a real terms increase in VED costs as rates have increased to keep pace with inflation only. Turning to clause 71, the changes made by this clause will increase the annual rates for domestic and foreign HGVs using UK roads and the associated daily, weekly, monthly and 6-monthly rates in line with RPI. For example, the annual rate of the most common type of UK HGV would increase by £21 from £576 to £597. As part of this uprating, the £9 and £10 caps on the daily rates paid by foreign HGVs, which are a consequence of retained EU law and are now obsolete, will therefore be removed. Madam Chair, I will now turn to the amendments. Government Amendment New Clause 1 corrects an omission in the Finance Bill of an uplift to the general haulage rate announced at Autumn Budget. This will insert a new clause to ensure that the legislation operates as intended by updating the currently recorded rate for the general haulage tax class 55, from £350 to £365 in line with RPI. Turning now to the Opposition Amendment New Clause 7, which seeks to require the Chancellor to make a statement about the impact of increasing vehicle excise duty on HGVs. This amendment is not necessary, as the Government has already published the Tax Information and Impact Note that sets out all the expected impact of this measure. This makes clear that hauliers will not see a real terms increase in their VED or HGV levy liabilities, as rates are being increased in line with RPI to keep pace with inflation only. The measure is also not expected to have any significant macroeconomic impacts. Madam Chair, increasing both VED rates for HGVs and the HGV levy by the RPI for 25-26 will ensure that VED receipts are maintained in real terms and that hauliers continue to make a fair contribution to the public finances within the wider context of a budget where hauliers have benefited from a further freeze in fuel duty worth nearly £1,100 a year for the average HGV. I therefore move that clauses 67, 68, 69 and 71, as well as Amendment New Clause 1, stand part of the bill, and I urge the committee to reject Amendment New Clause 7.
Shadow Minister James Watt.
Thank you. Mrs Vaz, as we've heard from the Minister, clauses 67 to 69 provide for changes to certain rates of VED, and clause 71 increases the rates for the HGV road user levy. We will not be opposing these provisions. However, we do have some concerns and points to make about the timing of these changes and the lack of support for impacted industries, such as the logistics sector. As well as speaking to those clauses, I will move New Clause 7 in the name of myself and my honourable friends. HGV VED is a complex picture with over 80 different rates, and it's the characteristics of HGVs that determines their rates. And the increases to HGV VED represent the first rise since 2014, and HGVs may also be liable for the additional HGV road user levy, which was introduced in 2014 and is a charge for using the road network ranging from £150 to £749 a year. I note the levy was suspended in August 2020, demonstrating the previous government's support for the haulage sector during the pandemic. A reformed levy was introduced in 2023 and was frozen at the autumn statement in 2023. And the new levy divides qualifying HGVs into 6 levy bands rather than 22 previously, which is a very welcome simplification. The government's decision to uprate HGV VED and the road user levy comes at a challenging time for businesses. I make no apology for referring once again to the increases in national insurance and the impact that is having on the sector. Logistics UK estimates that will cost its sector £1.2 billion alone, and they've warned this could lead to a reduction of 29,000 jobs. Does the Minister recognise figures from Logistics UK that the increases in VED and road user levy will cost the sector £172 million and £178 million respectively? And when taken in the context of other tax rises in the budget, what impact does the Minister think the increases will have on the logistics businesses' ability to invest in their growth and decarbonisation? It's because of the issues raised with us by the logistics sector that we've tabled new clause 7, which would require the Chancellor, within 6 months of the Act being passed, to make a statement about the impacts these changes are having. And that statement must also consider the impact of the increases on the haulage sector, the decarbonisation of the logistics sector and the UK economy. Industry has warned that these increases could impact their ability to invest, may lead to job losses. The Road Haulage Association has called for a delay, as now is not the time, in their words, to clobber UK hauliers with extra costs. So we'd welcome the Chancellor commissioning such a review. The Minister says that the tax information and impact note provides a forecast of what might happen. Indeed it does, but the point of this is an after-the-event review, which should be an important part of any policy making, and particularly in the Treasury, to see what the real-world impact was and how accurate those forecasts were. Logistics UK have also pointed to lack of progress in the budget on transport and energy infrastructure investment. And what assurances can the Minister give the sector to provide them with the confidence to invest? And whilst I know industry has welcomed the plug-in van grant as being maintained, can the Minister provide an update on the plug-in truck grant? As I've set out, we will not oppose these measures, but we do think the new clause would add to the bill.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for confirming the opposition will be supporting these clauses in today's bill. He asked about the wider challenges faced by road haulage in the industry, and road haulage is key to the UK's economy, of course, Madam Chair, and the government acknowledges the pressures the industry has faced in recent years. As a result of the changes in these clauses, hauliers will not see a real terms increase in their VED or their HGV levy liabilities, as rates are being increased in line with RPI to keep pace with inflation only. And of course, revenue from HGV VED and the HGV levy helps to ensure we can continue to fund the vital public services and infrastructure that people across the UK expect. And so it is right that the taxes are regularly reviewed. Of course, in the wider context, hauliers will also benefit from the further freeze in fuel duty for 25-26. The Chancellor announced a budget which is worth nearly £1,100 a year for the average heavy goods vehicle.
The question is that clause 67 stand part of the bill, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Clauses 68 and 69 have just been debated. With the leave of the committee, I will put a single question on those clauses. The question is that clauses 68 and 69 stand part of the bill, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to clause 70. The question is that clause 70 stand part of the bill. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And clause 70 makes minor amendments to ensure the legislation for the application of vehicle excise duty to zero-emission vehicles operates as intended. At Autumn Statement 2022, the former government announced that from April 2025, zero-emission cars, vans and motorcycles would begin to pay VED in line with their petrol and diesel counterparts. Clause 70 will ensure the legislation governing the application of VED to zero-emission vehicles operates as intended by making minor technical amendments to the legislation. The changes will clarify that the current VED exemption for electric vehicles, it will clarify the interpretation of data entries on the Certificate of Conformity and ensure all zero-emission vans registered between the 1st of January 2007 and the 31st of December 2008 pay VED in line with their petrol or diesel counterparts from April the 1st, 2025. Clause 70 will ensure the legislation for the application of VED to zero-emission vehicles operates as intended, and I therefore move that this clause stands part of the bill.
Shadow Minister James.
Thank you, Mrs. Vaz. I'll be very brief on this one. This is a perfectly sensible measure and we will not be opposing it.
Does the Lib Dem spokesperson? The question is that clause 70 stand part of the bill. As many left opinions aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Clause 71 was debated with clause 67, so we'll proceed straight to the question that clause 71 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to clause 72, with which it will be convenient to consider clause 73 and new clause 8. The question is that clause 72 stand part of the bill. Minister James Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Clause 72 sets the rates of air passenger duty, or APD, for the year 25-26 as announced at the Spring Budget 2024. These rates will take effect on 1st of April 2025. Clause 73 sets the rates of APD for the year 26-27 as announced at Autumn Budget 2024, and they will take effect a year later on April the 1st, 2026. Now, Madam Chair, APD rates have fallen in real terms because they are set more than a year in advance using forecast RPI, and inflation has subsequently been much higher than originally forecast. The former government announced that in 25-26 rates would be uprated by forecast RPI and non-economy rates will be adjusted to account partially for previously high inflation. For 26-27, the current government is making a broad-based adjustment to all rates to compensate in part for previous high inflation and is raising the higher rate on larger private jets by an additional 50%. These changes aim to ensure that the aviation industry continues to make a fair contribution to the public finances, and as is standard practice, the government has given the industry more than 12 months' notice. To go into some detail, Madam Chair, the changes made by Clause 72 will raise all APD rates by forecast RPI rounded to the nearest pound for the year 25-26. Non-economy rates will be further adjusted to correct partially for previous high inflation. For domestic and short-haul international economy passengers, these changes mean that the rates will stay at their current levels in 25-26. Rates for other economy class passengers will rise by £2. For non-economy international passengers, rates will rise between £2 for short-haul commercial passengers and £66 for those travelling ultra-long haul in larger private jets that incur the higher rate. The changes made by Clause 73 will raise all APD rates in 26-27 to account partially for previously high inflation and to increase the higher rate on larger private jets by an extra 50% above the increases to other rates. For economy class passengers, this means that those flying domestically would face an increase of £1. Rates on short-haul economy passengers would increase by £2, and those on long-haul economy passengers would increase by £12. The increases for non-economy passengers and those travelling in private jets will be greater. Whereas the short-haul international rate on economy passengers is increasing by £2, that on non-economy passengers is rising by £4, and that on private jet passengers by £58. Taken together, the corrections to non-economy rates announced at spring and autumn budgets do not raise rates by more than RPI over the period since 2021-22, based on the latest figures. From 27-28, rates will be rounded to the nearest penny to ensure they track forecast inflation more closely. Now, turning to the amendments, new Clause 8 would require the Chancellor to publish an assessment of the APD changes on the public finances, carbon emissions and on the finances of households at a range of different income levels. At Autumn Budget, the Government published a tax information and impact note which outlined the expected impacts of the APD charges, including the exchequer, household and environmental impacts. New Clause 8 is therefore unnecessary, and I urge the committee to reject this clause. Madam Chair, these changes to the APD rates will help to maintain APD rates in real terms following high inflation. I therefore move that clauses 72 and 73 stand part of the bill, and I urge that New Clause 8 is rejected.
Shadow Minister James Wilde.
Thank you once again. Mrs Vaz, as we've heard from the Minister, Clause 72 sets the rates of air passenger duty for the year 25-26 as announced at the Spring Budget 2024, precisely to give the sector the time to plan, with Clause 73 setting the rates of APD for 26-27. The higher rates that apply to larger private jets will also increase by an additional 50%, as the Minister referred to. And whilst we will not be opposing these measures, we would like to raise some points and to seek some more detail about the impact of these measures. And as well as speaking to clauses 72 and 73, I will also move and speak to new clause 8. APD was first introduced from the 1st of November 1994, and initially it was charged at a flat rate of £5 on flights within the UK and to other countries in the EEA, and £10 on flights elsewhere. And since then, APD has been reformed by successive governments and is currently a duty chargeable per passenger flying from UK airports to domestic, as well as obviously international destinations. And those rates vary by destination and by class of travel. According to the OBR, APD receipts are expected to raise £4.2 billion in 2024-2025. From then, they are forecast to increase by 9% a year on average to £6.5 billion in 29-30, driven by increasing passenger numbers and, of course, the higher duty rates. And under these tax changes, a family of 4 in economy flying to Florida, for example, will be taxed £408, a 16% increase on the current rate. Now, I'll come first to the changes in Clause 73 that relate to the higher rate, which will increase by an additional 50% on business and private jets. And there is some concern within the industry about the impact of this on economic growth, the government's driving number one mission, which we support their efforts in. In reality, most private jets are corporate aircraft that are used as capital assets. As one industry commentator said, they allow businesses to increase productivity and the amount of time they have in the day, which means they can make more money, employ more people and pay more in tax, something that I think we all support. So has the Minister calculated what impact the 50% increase will have on economic growth and developing our trade relationships? And the Prime Minister, rightly, travels a lot around the world to make connections and to promote trade in our economy. Can the Minister confirm whether the Royal Squadron itself is subject to these higher rates or whether they are exempt? There's also been some concern, obviously, about the impact on our constituents, people going on holiday, people going to see family and friends, and it may limit flight options. Airlines UK has said the rise will make it harder for British carriers to put on new routes. Does the Minister think this increase will impact the ability to consider new routes? It will certainly increase ticket prices, and I woke up this morning to hear the boss of Ryanair on the radio saying that the increases in APD mean that on their average £45 fare, a third of that will now be tax. And it's because of these impacts that the rate rises might have on consumer industry and economic growth that we have tabled New Clause 8, requiring the Chancellor within 18 months of the Act being passed to publish an assessment of the impact of the changes introduced by Section 73, and that must consider the impact of these charges on public finances, carbon emissions and household incomes. The industry has been clear that, and raised some warnings here, so we do need to take those seriously. And once again, I heard the Minister say this is unnecessary and this is all covered anyway, but these reviews should be an important part of the Treasury's toolkit to see what the impact has been. So, as I've set out, we won't be opposing these measures, but we will continue to raise the concerns that industry have, particularly on behalf of our constituents and people who want to go on holiday.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It might be worth my saying at the outset that our support for the aviation industry more broadly is very clear. I'm sure the Honourable Gentleman was listening to the Chancellor's growth speech yesterday, in which she announced that we'll no longer shy away from decision about airport expansion, which can be delivered to support economic growth whilst also meeting our climate obligations. And so I think people in the aviation industry can be of no doubt of this government's desire and willingness and concrete actions to work with them to drive economic growth in this country. But in relation specifically to APD, which is the subject of these clauses, I would say to the Honourable Gentleman that the adjustment to the APD rates for 26-27 is proportionate, because APD rates have fallen significantly behind inflation in recent years, and these changes will help to compensate for that fact. The short-haul international rate on economy passengers is increasing by £2, and that will be on April the 1st, 2026, and this rate has not increased since 2012. Even after April the 1st, 2026, for a family of 4, 2 adults, 2 children, flying economy class to Spain, the total APD increase will only be £4, since under 16s are exempt from APD if travelling in economy class. By contrast, the increases for non-economy passengers and those travelling private jets will be higher to ensure they make a fair contribution to the public finances. Of course, one other bit of context, Madam Chair, is that unlike other sectors, no VAT applies to plane tickets, and there is no tax on jet fuel, and so it is only fair that aviation pays its fair share through APD.
The question is that... I'll stand there. The question is that Clause 72 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I vote to move that further consideration of the bill be now adjourned.
Thank you. The question is that further consideration of the bill be now adjourned until 2 o'clock. As many as that of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order.
Committee Room 9, sound. 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 Committee Room 9, sound.